Good morning, and congratulations to you all. You may know that I was in Toronto just over 2 weeks ago for the Monk debate, which creates a major problem because I've already made my obligatory joke about your mayor. That leaves me without any way to begin this with a joke except by being meta, which I've just done. So let me speak for a few minutes on what I think of, if there was a title for this talk, it would be The Joy of Being Dismal. I want to talk to you a little bit about economics. You're all Bachelor of Commerce now, and I presume that means that many, if not all of you, have taken some economics. And I think there will be a temptation, there often is, to let that go in later life, to stop, to forget what you learned in class, to turn your attention to other things. And I want to urge you not to do that. I want to tell you that we are in fact living in times that make economics more relevant, more useful, basically have demonstrated the value of what it is that people like me teach. Now, economics is generally, everybody knows the term dismal science. What do we mean by that? Well, what was originally meant when the term was first used, it was because in the early phases of what we now call economics, there was the argument, the Malthusian argument, that said that no persistent improvement in the human condition was possible, because any rise in prosperity would lead to rise in the population, and you'd drive wages back down to subsistence, which, by the way, was not a foolish thing to say at that point. If you look at the history of civilization, that proposition was basically true for 56 of the past 58 centuries. Fortunately, we're living in the 2 centuries for which it wasn't true, and in fact, there's been an enormous improvement in the human condition. Some people they talk about economics being the dismal science because they think of it as, they hated Econ 101, and so it's dismal in that sense. I'm sorry, that just means that Econ 101 wasn't well taught, or they were using the wrong textbook, and I have one to recommend. But there's yet another meaning. One is that economists are almost always telling you about tough trade-offs. They're telling you about opportunity cost, what you must give up to get something you want. And that this is almost always true, although right now happens to be one of those times when it's not true, because we have all of these unemployed workers, unemployed resources. The last reason that people call economics dismal is because it is a field, a subject that gets a lot more attention when times are bad. And this is true. This is clearly, there's a lot more interest in the stuff that I and my friends do right now than there would be if things were better. And if as we hope, this economic crisis eventually just fades away, we will actually have a lot less hits, maybe some shrinkage of the number of people following my Twitter feed and that sort of thing. The question is it right to be paying attention to economists? Surely the fact that the economy is in such a mess might suggest that we don't actually know anything, right? But that's actually not true. And what I wanted to say, I think it's really important to drive home, is that in a perverse sort of way, this economic crisis has actually been a triumph for the study of economics. It's been a demonstration that it really does make sense to study this stuff, to know it. In good times, academic fields like economics certainly academic economics is maybe not all that useful. If you want to know what's going to happen to bond prices, want to know what's going to happen to interest rates in the next week or the next month in normal times, you probably want to talk to a serious bond trader. Although he or she, if she actually does know, won't tell you, right? But there's, in normal times, experience, intuition, the things that allow smart financial operators to get rich are what matter. But in times like this, that experience doesn't help very much because we're in a once in 3 generations economic crisis. You have to turn to more abstract study. You have to turn to people who have theoretical models or people who study deep history, people who know about what happened in the 1930s and try to apply it to what's happening right now. So this has been a time when there certainly is a demand for real economic analysis coming out of more or less academic havens. Has that analysis worked? Well, the amazing thing is that to a large extent it has. Now, I have an admission to make. I'm 60. I've been out there. I've had obviously a very successful academic career. But in the nature of doing economics, I've never been quite convinced that I actually knew anything. Right? You're out there. I knew how to publish a paper. I knew how to write stuff that other academics would praise. I eventually learned how to write 800 words in a way that non-academics were willing to read. But that's not the same as actually really knowing something about the real world. Does all this stuff that I've been teaching and preaching, does it actually work in practice? And then we got the real test. And the test was, wow, terrible things are happening in the world. We're entering an environment. We're doing policy experiments, if you like, that are completely out of the range of experience of anybody now living. Do I have anything to contribute? And the answer, amazingly, is, well, if you took textbook macroeconomics seriously, if you actually believed the stuff that you read in Krugman and Wells, 4th edition coming soon, and applied it, you got things basically right. You understood that big increases in the monetary base were not going to cause lots of inflation, that budget deficits, which may drive up interest rates in normal times, were not going to do so under these conditions, that sharp cuts in government spending, despite what some people were saying, were in fact going to lead to sharp cuts in GDP and employment. You had these, in many cases, quite counterintuitive predictions that turned out to be true. And I have to say that personally, in the midst of these terrible events, on one hand, oh my God, this is terrible, and it's a really horrible world. And by the way, I mean, it really is. I mean, if you don't know some people who are really suffering in this crisis, then you have a very narrow social set. And of course, much, much worse if you happen to have European friends. But if in the midst of all this, there's been a slight spark of joy, like, oh, guess what? It turns out that I wasn't a phony after all. The stuff really does work. The models actually do succeed in tracking events. And that has turned out to be not just a source of some readership for columns and not just a guide for policy, although unfortunately way too often policymakers have chosen to ignore what we know, but also even helpful for doing business. It turns out that this is a time when businesses, certainly financial businesses, really need people who understand economics, good economists. I can give you some examples that I won't go through them, but if you look at what has actually happened in the financial industry, you can discover that there are investment companies that have employed really good economists, and some that instead went for their more sort of visceral approach, what worked in the guts of the people running them. And it turns out that the ones with the good economists are the ones who have done better, because it turns out that this economic stuff works. Okay, now just to come back, you are all going out there to the world of business, where your primary job will be to make money, which is fine. I think someone said it's among the most harmless activities a person can. No, it's an important one. But also, ultimately, this matters for human good. And what we have now, we have a vast tragedy right now, a tragedy of wasted workers, of wasted resources, of gratuitous suffering, because this doesn't have to be happening. And it is a crisis, a tragedy we know how to end. We know how to end because the dismal science tells us how. And so I hope that you will do your part in helping to convince the people who have their hands on the levers of power to make use of the knowledge we have and to make this a better place. and a more boring one, but that's good too. Thank you so much.